So I called my primary care physician. I said, hey, can you give me 10 half-milligram Klonopin tablets to use just as needed? You ever have a thing you've done in life that you regret more than anything? That would be that phone call. I really should have been to a different type of AA meeting, which would have been Akathisia Anonymous, but there is no Akathisia Anonymous. Once you take a psychiatric medicine, your credibility is gone as a reporter of your own experience.
Hi, I'm Daniel Owens from Inner Compass Initiative. Welcome to ICI Stories, where we give people the chance to take back control of their story. When we enter the mental health system, we become psychiatrized. We end up giving up ownership of our narratives, often without realizing it. We let others define what is happening to us and why. We take on their language and concepts and incorporate them into our identity. But then for some of us, we reach a point where we start to think that something is wrong, something doesn't quite feel right. That the story that we're being told about ourselves doesn't quite fit with the reality we're experiencing. Bit by bit, we start to question and probe. And with it comes an emerging sense of ourselves as narrators of our own lives, until eventually we're ready to tell our own story as we see it. There are many stories like this. This is one of them. Okay, Chris, thanks for joining us here. First of all, could you just give us a bit of a brief introduction about who you are, where you're from, and what's your professional background, etc.?
Basically, I'm Chris Page. I am now a withdrawal coach, but I've been a licensed clinical social worker in the United States for the last 34 years. I am currently living in Kansas City, Kansas.
First of all, we want to start right at the beginning. So what was your life like before you entered the mental health system? Who was Chris Page back then?
Well, first I like to start off, I grew up in a family of divorce. I was adopted, moved a lot or a fair amount as a kid, which I think kind of created the foundation for my entrance into psychiatry. My life was going pretty well, except, as I would imagine a lot of your audience, I had a life stressor that occurred, and that was a divorce. And the divorce was very painful, as divorce is for many people. And it was at that time, which I was in my early 30s at that time. I had never taken a psychiatric medicine up until that point. And it was at that point when my stress really started to grow, and I would imagine there was a fair amount of grief. And I think some of my own trauma history from childhood was getting stirred up too. So I was pretty stressed. I was really anxious. And really the precipitating event that led me to ever take a psychiatric drug was running into my ex-wife with her new boyfriend about 2 months after our divorce. And that was very distressing. Mm-hmm. And the next day, I was actually with a colleague of mine working on some doctoral level social work policy that we were kind of working together on. And she just noticed I was completely agitated and stressed out and said, I take this medicine called Klonopin. You should maybe talk to somebody about taking some Klonopin. I'm like, okay. I will do anything at this point to manage this anxiety. And, after, I was already in the field at that point. And in many ways, when I speak to other colleagues now, the early 90s here in the United States was kind of the pinnacle of psychiatry, in the sense that we were just beginning to introduce meds on a more widespread level. And I used to work at, one of my first jobs was working in a psychiatric hospital and on a child and adolescent unit. And we used to get kids at that point for 2-3 months at a time. And some of those kids would be in the hospital for 2 or 3 months and never given a medication. It was just, they were there for all the different programming and a stable environment and 3 meals a day and art therapy and physical therapy and all these different things. But as needed, medicine would be introduced in a much more conservative, would probably be a good word, a conservative way of introducing it. I never saw kids on more than one med. That's another thing that was kind of historic back then. So that was really my entrance. I called a colleague and actually said, hey, would you be willing to prescribe me some Klonopin? And as everybody knows, at least in the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, doctors really didn't have much hesitation prescribing benzodiazepines because we really weren't at the knowledge point we are in it today. So he had no issue giving me, a prescription for some Klonopin. And the first Klonopin I ever took, I remember it felt like all the air in my anxious body was just released. All the pressure was gone. I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so much better. And as anybody that's taken a benzodiazepine that was effective for them knows, the effect can be pretty immediate. So to go from a 9 or a 10 on my anxiety scale down to a 2 or a 3 within 20 minutes is pretty seductive and pretty enticing. And so needless to say, that began my journey into psychiatry. So I started taking Klonopin first as needed and then daily.
Were you given a diagnosis at this point?
I was not given a diagnosis, honestly, because it was a colleague that was treating me kind of off the books. But if I was going to diagnose myself at that point, I think I had some post-traumatic stress from childhood getting activated by the divorce, combined with some I think normal healthy anxiety that anybody feels after a profound loss in their life, and some grief and depression.
So at the beginning, the meds were beneficial for you. I'm assuming they.
Yes.
And how long did it last before you started to encounter problems with them?
I would guesstimate about 2 to 3 years. And I was convinced I had MS. I had a tremor. I was having memory issues, and I was terrified, And so I actually made an appointment with a neurologist because I'd actually stopped the Klonopin. I called my mom. I remember saying, I think it's this medicine I'm taking. And she said, wow, maybe stop it or talk to your doctor. And I said, I think that makes sense. And so didn't really talk to a doctor. I just figured, as probably most of us figured that have ever taken a psychiatric medicine, that we could just stop it without any consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we all know stopping 1.5 milligrams of Klonopin or 2 milligrams a day of Klonopin is a pretty hefty dose. And so it made the tremor more severe. It made my memory issues more severe. So I consulted with a neurologist, and in 2004, he said to me, I think it's because you stopped the Klonopin. I reinstated, and over the next probably 4 months, I tapered, off of 1.5 milligrams of Klonopin, which I think for most of your listeners would, recognize that that's a pretty fast taper off that dosage of Klonopin. And I don't remember anything specifically bad happening per se when I got off the Klonopin, except retrospectively, which I think is how many of us figure out what happened to us. We look back and go, oh, I didn't realize that was that at that point. It probably, started me down a road of higher rebound anxiety. It probably sensitized my system to be more sensitive to things, which then I think led me to, use Klonopin again one other time. This time it was a little harder to get off of, and I said, I'm never taking this stuff daily again. Daily's the problem. If I just don't take it daily, maybe if I take it every once in a while, it won't be a problem. Mm-hmm. So I go a couple of years without taking any. And then I experience, I'm in a really, really challenging business relationship. I'm working way too much. My dog dies. I'm selling my home. I'm displaced. There's a lot of life stress. And at the same time, I get a prostate infection. And I go to the urologist and I tell him I have a prostate infection. And he gives me ciprofloxacin, or Cipro as most people know it, which is a fluoroquinolone antibiotic. And in 2013, when this happened, there was no black box warning on Cipro for neuropsychiatric issues, meaning insomnia, agitation, depression, things like that. I stopped sleeping. I think my life stress at that time also was kind of tipping over and causing other, kind of concentration issues and stress related issues. So I called my primary care physician. I said, hey, can you give me 10 half-milligram Klonopin tablets to use just as needed? You ever have a thing you've done in life that you regret more than anything? That would be that phone call. She prescribes me 21 milligram tablets. And over the next 3.5 months, I take an accumulated amount of 16 total milligrams. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I remember, I will never forget, I'm sitting on my friend's father's back patio, and the three of us are having a beer on a Friday afternoon. And all of a sudden I get that feeling. Oh my God, am I in benzo withdrawal? How is this possible? I thought it was just from daily use. I thought if I ever used it every once in a while, it couldn't cause this. I started going into kind of a tolerance paradoxical place where I would take the Klonopin at night, and instead of it causing me to go to sleep, it would cause me to be awake. Mm-hmm. And I stopped sleeping. Now I know why the military uses sleep deprivation as an enhanced interrogation technique, because it makes you crazy. You literally go crazy.
Yeah.
And I was probably sleeping maybe 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day, still trying to somehow manage my life. Things were falling apart. I felt like I was like on an ice, a lake of ice with no skates on, trying to run as fast as I can. And the faster I ran, the more my feet would fall out from underneath me and I'd hit my head on the ice. It was just the beginning of the most profoundly helpless experience that I've ever had in my life. So again, my primary was of no use. She didn't understand what was happening. So I called a place called Point of Return. And they were a group that used to sell supplements and also had a doctor on staff that would prescribe people's benzos and taper them. And I started working with Point of Return, and I had reinstated at 0.25 milligrams of Klonopin with the hope to stabilize and then taper. But I was getting sicker and getting worse. So after a point of where I'd stopped working and I was really just getting sicker and sicker, my family convinced me to fly to Vermont. I was in Florida at the time, to go to a 5-day medically supervised detox. Mm-hmm. So I fly to Vermont. My family, my mother and sister see me. I look terrible. I probably lost 10 pounds. I had dark circles and bags under my eyes. I honestly look like a drug addict, and that's what I think becomes the conundrum for many of us that go on this journey, is we look sick, we're taking a medicine, you must be a drug addict. You're using the medicine inappropriately. Mm-hmm. So I had a whole list of questions that I was going to ask when I went to the detox to see if it was an appropriate place for me. I go into the assessment area, I guess, the intake area. And they're interviewing me, and I'm like, can I ask some questions? And they're like, no, we can't answer anything. So that was strike one. And then I said, I'm not doing it. And my sister basically threw a complete fit. And I remember in a fit of anger, I said to her, fine, I'll do it. But if it goes wrong, it's on you. Well, it went wrong. And ironically, she didn't seem to suffer any withdrawal symptoms. So it didn't end up being on her. It ended up being completely on me.
You also have another paradigm, which is the kind of drug addiction paradigm, right? As well, that you kind of you fell foul of as well. And I kind of get the sense that sort of was why you got pushed to doing the detox to some degree as well, right?
Yes. And when you're in a detox, you're with the two classes of people that I was with were people that were withdrawing from alcohol or people that were withdrawing from opiates or heroin. So I get in the detox. The intake is one of the most humiliating experiences, cavity searches, stripped down naked, put in basically a jumpsuit. You feel like you're going more into a prison than into a detox center. So I get into this detox center, and I'm on 1.25 milligrams of Klonopin. And they tell me they're going to get me off in 5 days by cutting 0.25 milligrams of Klonopin a day. And the psychiatrist looks me in the face and says, this is actually a slow taper. Well, most of us that have been educated in this know 1.25 milligrams of Klonopin, if tapered correctly, should take between 6 months on the short end to 2 to 3 years to 4 years for some people. Mm-hmm. So every day I start to get the cut, and I'm just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And, I'm going this direction while the alcohol and opiate addicted people are going this direction. But day 3, they're like, let's go to the gym and play some basketball. And I'm like, hey, let's go to the gym and find a place to jump off the roof. Mm-hmm. And I'm just getting significantly worse. I'm not sleeping. I'm just pacing the halls of the unit all night long, getting sicker and sicker. And then they put me on some support meds to try to help me sleep. And those help on and off. But after 5 days, they discharge me. And because of family pressure, I agreed to go to an outpatient program that's connected to the detox center. It's this whole big campus that we're on. So that night, the first night, I had to stay in like a dorm for that outpatient program, is one of the longest nights of my life. And I remember staring at my nightstand in this boarding house, basically, and seeing 4 medication bottles, thinking, oh my God, I went in on 1 medicine and now I'm on 4. Mm-hmm. How did this happen? And, I'm writing my family suicide letters. And honestly, if I could have figured out how to adequately hook my belt to the shower rod, I wouldn't be talking to us right now. Mm-hmm. But I'm in this dorm with like 30 other people, and I'm yelling all night, like moaning, like, oh my God, just screaming. I'm being tortured. So the next morning I get disciplined in a sense, and I call into the outpatient program, and I'm like, I can't come in. And they're like, if you can't come in today, XXX are going to happen to you. And I remember walking across, there's like a quad, an open quad area. And I remember dropping to my knees and thinking, I know their bridge is pretty close to here I could go jump off of. Do I go jump, or do I go to the outpatient program? And this became kind of the core of my existence for the next 3 or 4 years, which was, do I stay alive or do I give up? I choose to go into this outpatient program. They expect me to sit in groups. I can't sit. So I'm pacing around this outpatient program like a raving lunatic. And they diagnosed me with a social phobia, saying I can't participate in groups. No, I can't sit. That was the problem. And the irony is I was diagnosed with a social phobia where 6 months before I was on a microphone speaking in front of 350 people. Here's a newsflash. People with social phobias don't get on microphones and speak in front of 350 people with no issue. So, I get misdiagnosed, and I tell one too many people that day that I'm going to harm myself. So then I get pulled into an office and basically told, you have 2 choices. You can sign yourself to the psych ward voluntarily, or we can get 3 people to sign you in. And in probably one of the few moments of clarity I've had that entire time, I said, I'll sign myself in. And for anybody in the United States, if you ever find yourself in that conundrum, always sign yourself in. Mm-hmm. Because if you sign yourself in, you don't lose your rights. If they have to involuntarily commit you in this country, you will never own a firearm. You will have tons of other things on your record that will really diminish your ability to be free. Right? Mm-hmm. Not that I need to own a firearm, but I'm just saying these are the limitations that are given to people. And as a mental health professional, it could have jeopardized my license. That's another thing too. So I preemptively and proactively said, okay, I'll sign myself in. The akathisia that day was some of the worst I'd had at that point. I hadn't had akathisia quite that severe yet. And I probably paced 8 or 9 hours that day. And so I end up in a psych ward. The intake person was very kind. They said, I don't want to put you with the general population. Would you have any issue going to the LGBT unit? I'm like, I have no issue with that. So I got into a much calmer, cleaner, safer place than with the general psychiatric population. And so I was in there for 6 days, again, ranting and raving to anybody that would listen. This isn't mental illness. This is from the medicine. I wasn't like this before. This isn't who I am. You get the condescending, it's okay, sweetie. We know. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. Poor Chris. Sure, you were a therapist before this. Sure,
Yeah.
it's okay. I was the Pope. You're right. Sure, sure. This
It's it
condescension.
it just reminds me of like film noir or science fiction films I've seen from the 50s, where you get the guy, he's the wrong guy, and he gets people chasing him.
Yep.
He's just a regular guy walking down doing his job, and then a series of events happen, and he finds himself being held down and
Yeah.
injected in some kind of hospital, and he's like, "You've got the wrong guy. You've got the wrong guy."
I mean, I used to feel like exactly that. Like I was the only one on a planet that understood what was going on, and all the
Right.
other residents of the planet didn't know what was going on. And you know, and as anybody knows, the more you're told something doesn't exist, the louder you get.
Yeah.
The more desperate you get. So my time in the inpatient unit ran out because my benefits wouldn't pay for anymore. And I didn't even sleep the last night I was in the unit. So they discharged me with no sleep. I go back to this outpatient program, and around noon of that day, I meet with the outpatient psychiatrist. And he looks me in the eye and says, "You're 7 days off of benzos. If you think you're still in benzo withdrawal, I recommend you go back to Florida." I said, "Can you hold on a second?" I went to a payphone and said, "Mom, book me a ticket. I'm coming back to Florida." Okay. My refusal of treatment is one of the only reasons I'm alive.
Hmm.
But when you're seen as an addict and you refuse treatment, then you start getting the messaging of, well, if you're unwilling to help yourself, we're not going to help you. Oh, you think you're smarter than the doctors. That kind of messaging, disparaging, condescending, and marginalize who we are. So I go back home and somehow convince my stepmom to let me stay with them for like 8 months. And I am just a lunatic. And because they're treating me like a drug addict, they make me go to 2 to 3 AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings a day. So I have severe akathisia, and I'm sitting in these groups, sort of sitting in these groups, going, "Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm an alcoholic." When I really should have been to a different type of AA meeting, which would have been Akathisia Anonymous.
Yeah.
But there is no Akathisia Anonymous. And so if you sit in an AA meeting and you're going like this all the time, you know what people think you are? A drug addict.
Hmm.
So it becomes this self-perpetuating, reinforcing negative feedback loop. We have symptoms that mimic the original thing that got us on the med. We behave in ways that are out of control, and we mimic also substance abuse behaviors. So
Yeah.
we get thrown into these different bins and baskets that don't apply to our situation. And then when we say this doesn't apply to our situation, we're seen as treatment resistant or lacking insight or any of the things we get labeled with, where as if we're refusing, "Oh, Chris, you're just mentally ill. If you would just accept your mental illness diagnosis, we could help you."
Yeah.
Versus that's not what's going on. I'm injured. I'm
Yeah.
sick.
Just explain the next period to uh, going through this horrific situation of having akathisia and getting to where you are now. What's the trajectory there?
So I'm getting significantly sicker. I actually call a doctor in, I think he was in Fort Lauderdale. He's actually somebody I think was one of the first people doing benzo tapering. And I was at day 17, and he said he wouldn't reinstate me at day 17 because the Ashton manual said not more than 2 weeks. I'm on these support meds, which were Seroquel, Remeron, gabapentin, and what was the Visteral. So over the next 7-8 months, I stay with my stepmom. I have given up my psychotherapy practice. I have sold a business I had to try to support myself to survive this. I am starting, I have a great group of friends. They're terrified. They're like, we'll send you anywhere. We'll pay for anything. So my other friend finds this rehab place that says they can help me get off, because I was terrified of the Seroquel and Remeron, that can help me get off these support meds. I call the medical director. I talked to him. I said, how are you going to get me off these other meds? He goes, we'll use Ativan. I'm like, really? So you're going to take me off meds and now put me back on the original or a different benzo? Does it seem like I'm a dog chasing its tail, So now I refuse treatment to my friends. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to alienate them, combined with the fact that, one of the biggest regrets I have is about 6 or 7 months into my journey, I have an amazing group of college friends. We have about 16 of us on an email thread that we communicate with each other every day. And I sent a group goodbye letter to everybody, which, needless to say, was not well received. So over the next 8 months, I stay with my stepmom, and this becomes the beginning of my flirtation with killing myself. I would spend my days going to different ways of suiciding, and about a year into it, I get desperate. My family's getting tired of me. My stepmom kicks me out. They've had enough of me. I go back home and I can't function. I'm completely unfunctional. So I then become the most resourceful person on the earth. I find somebody through Benzo Buddies, a psych survivor people out in Anchorage, Alaska, that agree to help me. And even these people that are incredibly educated in psychiatric drug withdrawal don't understand what's going on with me and can't handle me. So they kicked me out. They had promised me a year, and they gave me 3 months and kicked me out. And I'd lost my home in Florida. All my social support was gone. I had nowhere to go. I'm stranded 6,000 miles from anybody I know. My resources are starting to dwindle. I'm in this little rented apartment in a city I know no one, pacing every day, just honestly lamenting the fact that I don't have access to a firearm at that point. Mm-hmm. And my best friend somehow reaches out to me and says, hey, you can come stay with me. So I get on the plane, I sit down. The second they close the doors, my brain goes, you're trapped, you're trapped, you're trapped. I grab a seatbelt, I fly to the back of the plane. The flight attendants are strapping in. And I'm like, I got to get off. I got to get off the plane. I got to get off the plane. And they're like, what? And one of them gets up and picks up the phone back there to call the cockpit. And then I'm like, okay, no. I'll go sit down. So I go back to my seat. I fasten my seatbelt. I'm in the chair like this. I look like I'm getting tasered, basically. I'm like this. The people around me must have been really comforted. In the post 9/11 world, nobody loves more than a guy on their plane looking like a complete lunatic.
Yeah.
The second the pilot turns the fasten seatbelt sign off, I unfasten the seatbelt, hop up, spend the next 7 hours in the back galley of the plane just pacing back and forth, wondering if I should open the door and jump out. I don't know if anybody's seen the show Dexter, but one rule I did create for myself was no innocents get harmed in the process. So I wasn't going to take the whole plane down just to relieve myself. So I get to Cleveland. My friend handles me for a couple months, and then another psych survivor in Florida says, hey, I'll take care of you. Go down there, and after a year and a half, they're sick of me, and they kick me out. And it was just at that time, which is about 4 years into my journey, that I'm able to work a few hours a week. And I can sort of support myself with the most minimal lifestyle. But that's how I survived that part.
Yeah. That is a very similar experience to what all of us experience when we go through this awful situation of iatrogenic harm. You go to the doctor, you trust the doctor, you get this nice medicine, the nice doctor gives you the medicine, And then for some reason, the medicine starts to harm you, and you report it back to the doctor. You say, this medicine's harming me. The doctor denies it, won't recognize it. You go to another specialist, they won't recognize it. And then bit by bit, there's this slow, horrific realization that you are on your own. No one's coming to help you. There's no cavalry riding to rescue you, you know. Mm-hmm.
And, when you get to the place where doctors have abandoned you or misdiagnosed you, and you realize there's no resources for you, then you have to practice the hardest thing for many of us, which is radical acceptance. That we have to accept the unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And accept doesn't mean like, yay, awesome. It's more like, okay, this is my reality. How do I deal with it?
So going back to your this idea of radical acceptance, and just tell us a bit about how you lived through this awful experience and came out the other side.
Well, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was using this concept called the Stockdale paradox. A lot of people in the United States know a former senator named John McCain, and one of John McCain's biggest, accomplishments really was that he was in a place called the Hanoi Hilton, which was a North Vietnamese prison camp, where he was held for 2.5 years and somehow survived and came out. Well, there was a guy named Admiral James Stockdale who was also at the Hanoi Hilton, but he was there for 7.5 years. He was the longest standing prisoner who survived. And they asked him afterwards how he survived. And he said it was a dual focus, and that's the paradox. Okay. On one hand, I had an unwavering commitment to survive. Now, does that mean that, with a gun in my mouth, I didn't come close numerous times? Yes. But somehow there was this divine force in me, or higher power, or whatever it was, that kept me from fully ever pulling that trigger. So for me, it became little tricks, as I'm pacing it for hours a day, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's killing time. God knows it was like, this is your life negatively on steroids. Every negative memory I'd ever had in my life, every negative thought I'd had in my life is bombarding me while I'm doing this. But somehow I'm saying to myself, it's the injury. It's the injury. This is not me. This is the injury. This is not me. This is the injury. Very hard to do. Doesn't mean, I want everybody out there to understand that when I'm saying I'm doing these things, they were to the best of my ability, meaning that it wasn't perfect or even remotely close in any sense. It was just enough that I'm sitting here today to be part of this interview. So it was, killing time. When can I make it to 11:05 and then 11:10 and then 11:15 and then 11:20? Again, even in Alaska, walking to different places, I could hurt myself. They have all these tour buses. I would stand on the side of the road, step into the road, step back, step into the road, step back. In a bizarre way, it gave me a feeling of a little bit of control. Mm-hmm. Didn't change my symptoms at all, but it gave me this illusion of control that I could end my life if I so chose, mm-hmm. Which thank God I did not choose to do.
Yeah.
It became, I had two people, one of them being Nicole Lamberson, who became literally my lifelines. I had this amazing woman named Marcia for the first 8-9 months of my journey. She would spend 5 or 6 hours a day on the phone with me while I'm just ranting. And I'd be like, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. And she's calmly going, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. And it was her voice was just enough to keep me from harming myself. And it was, I think having a buddy, that you can find is incredibly important. And the gift of her was she was further along in her journey than me. She wasn't as sick as I was. So she could give me some hope and some perspective, which was incredibly valuable. So it's things like that get you through the day.
Do you think it made a difference, you being because you're a trauma-informed therapist, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think your background as a mental health professional and as a therapist played a role and helped you in getting through this?
Undoubtedly. undoubtedly, even though I do wonder, it seems clear cut to me, but a lot of my coaching clients struggle with this idea of, you sure it's the meds? I'm like, well, I was one way. I took this medicine and I became this way, which was very different than this way. How could it not be the medicine? But I get it. People, it's just not only that, but it compromises our ability to comprehend things and remember things and believe things. But I do believe, Dan, that you're right, that my background helped because it allowed me, I think, to have a clearer idea of what was happening to me.
Excellent. And tell us, how is Chris Page today? How did Chris Page get from that horrific experience living day to day to where you are now?
So one of the other tricks I used was future-oriented fantasies. If I survive this, I'm going to do X. I'll have an opportunity to be on the other side and help people in this. I'll be able to use my wisdom and knowledge to create, hopefully, more credible science-based programming that we can then appeal to mainstream medicine to make these issues and conditions more mainstream understood. And then another one was to meet the love of my life. And I'm sitting in a home in Kansas City, Missouri, with the love of, or Kansas City, Kansas, with the love of my life. So that goal was met. And then the other goal was to create a research institute to study akathisia. And I've created something called the Institute for Akathisia Research and Prevention. And we have some other good akathisia organizations that are doing more messaging, I think, to the public and also to professionals. But my goal is to actually do research. So we're creating an internship program to have psychology and master's level interns do akathisia research. And my goal is to raise enough money to create a robust research program that people will kind of come to do active research, because akathisia still falls in this crack where it's seen predominantly as a movement disorder, and movement, I believe, is still a very important part of the diagnosis of akathisia. Because how do you differentiate restlessness alone from akathisia? It's the movement. But, and I want everybody that says they have inner akathisia to understand this. Everybody that has ever had akathisia has inner akathisia. That's how it works. The inner causes the outer. Okay? The outer is the expression of the inner. And to have a research group that I'm trying to get a couple of neurologists. I have a psychiatrist. I have a psychologist who is the head of a psychology department. And I actually have a student right now creating a scale for her doctoral dissertation to update the Barnes scale for akathisia, because anybody that understands akathisia knows the Barnes scale is inadequate. It's not comprehensive enough. So the first thing we're doing as an organization is trying to update a scale, create a scale to actually distribute to doctors and mental health professionals so people will have a better understanding of what akathisia looks like. Because akathisia, like many of these other conditions, is a mimicking symptom. It looks very similar to a host of other psychiatric illnesses. And that's why it gets misdiagnosed all the time or unseen all the time. So again, my goal is to create something that tangible that can change the outcome for the thousands, 10,000s, hundreds of thousands of people going through.
What was your perspective on the mental health system prior to this awful experience, and how has it changed as a result of this experience?
I think two big things have changed. One is when I first started in the system, I was fascinated by the concept of diagnosing, of finding differences between conditions and being able to give people accurate diagnoses, because I believed at that time that could lead to more effective treatment. Mm-hmm. And then the second part is that, these meds correct a chemical imbalance and they are effective and helpful. And so that changed my whole paradigm, looking at, instead of depression being a mental illness, I now look at depression as an adaptive response to stress. Mm-hmm. Let's think about this. If I'm a mammal and the world is scary and overwhelming and I feel like I'm being attacked, What's the primary behavioral manifestation of depression is isolation. Doesn't isolation protect me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How does the fatigue of depression protect me? It's like hibernating. It forces me to rest. It forces me to disengage. So I think it's an adaptive response to stress that we've pathologized. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think the long-term studies on SSRIs show they don't work. And the reason they don't work is because depression is a signal from our body to our mind that things aren't okay,
Yeah.
that we need to evaluate things and look at our life. And you give somebody a medication that numbs that, you're denying a mammal of an opportunity to learn and adapt to their current life circumstances.
Yeah.
And when we try to numb out these protective parts, they just get louder. So for any of you who have children, when you ignore your child's complaints, do they get quieter or louder? They get louder. Our body works the same way.
Mm-hmm.
That if we try to ignore these complaints, they only get louder because it's trying to protect us.
So you as we've said, you were in the system as a mental health professional. Obviously, you must have had a lot of colleagues that in that system as well. How have you found your experience becoming an outsider, kind of challenging this paradigm? How have you found that experience in terms of interacting with colleagues and other people within the mental health system?
The pharma companies in this country have done a masterful job of tricking doctors into believing that they only have positive effects and that side effects are rare. How many people I worked with have told their doctor of something and it says it right in the pamphlet and the doctor says that's rare. Okay, because they've been duped.
Yeah.
They've been duped. And the only remaining issue I have with doctors at this point is not that they didn't know, because I did more research than any human. A doctor doesn't get off work and go, my life is on the line. Let me research this for 14 hours tonight. They don't. Okay, but somebody going through this does. And the only issue I had with doctors that I still have is listen to me. Mm-hmm. Why do you not listen to me? And I think anybody that's been injured by a psychiatric medicine understands this, which is once you take a psychiatric medicine, your credibility is gone as a reporter of your own experience.
Yeah.
And that's the core of the problem. If we can even teach doctors, you don't even have to know what an adverse effect looks like. Just trust your patient. Don't tell me that you think it's my illness when I am telling you as a reporter of my own experience that I know I was this way on Tuesday, I took it on Wednesday, and I'm this way on Friday. Don't tell me I don't know my own experience, please. Just real quick, we have to remember too, all injuries are not the same. Mm-hmm. Some people have relatively mild, they're disturbing and bothersome, but they can still function and work. Yeah. Some people have an increasing level of disability, and then some people are completely disabled. So the person here and the person here are not having similar experiences. So thus they have different ways they have to deal with this.
Yeah.
Like the three words that still can trigger me is when somebody says to me, well, I had to. Like I had to work, or I had to work too. I couldn't. Mm-hmm. So when you say I had to, and you tell me that somehow I'm weak, you're gaslighting my experience. Mm-hmm. Please don't do that to us, please.
Yeah. And just kind of summing up and bringing this all together, looking back on your journey, what would you say has been the most transformative lesson you've learned?
That every moment in life is a gift, and that we can recover from the most profoundly dark places. That there are people out there listening to this that I'm sure that are at their wits' end, that think they can't go on another moment. If you can go on another moment, and then another moment, and then another moment, you will eventually get to a place where you will get relief. Do I believe people recover 100% universally? No. Do I believe everybody that does the right things and doesn't get in their own way of recovering experiences significant recovery? Yes, I believe that 100%. And my practice over the last 4 years bears it out. Please hang in there. There is another side to this, I promise.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. Any final words, anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to add?
No, just again, Daniel, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for everybody listening. If you want any more information about me, just Google my name, Chris Page, Paige. There's plenty of other interviews. And also, if you would ever like to reach out to me about a coaching consultation, I'd welcome that opportunity.